First of all, I welcome the opportunity, Minister. I want to pay tribute to Minister Noonan in relation to this, his dedication, his hard work and his commitment. And the programme for government promised to review, and we've got that review. And what we're under discussion here today is the strategic plan, and that's based and arises from a report on the National Parks and Wildlife carried out by Dr. Stout and Mr. Gníomhaíochta. And then that was followed by, I'm not sure why that was necessary, reflect and renew. But in any event, we have the three documents now. And I want to say, I actually found it difficult not to be depressed in reading the review. I looked for hope. The hope is what Mr. Noonan has put a plan before us, and the emphasis will have to be on implementation. But let me just quote a tiny bit from it. And I have read every single word of this review, I can tell you, and so have my staff in relation. Let me just try and put context on this for a minute. Our overall conclusion, based on the weight of evidence, is that it's time for change. Ireland's natural environment, including its diversity, is in trouble. It's time for fundamental reform. And then we are in the midst of a global crisis. Nature is our life support system. It's here for anybody to read. But the statistics of loss are shocking. 75% of the land of the earth is very significantly altered by human activity. 66% of the world's oceans are experiencing increasing cumulative impacts of global and so on. Today, human population and livestock comprise 96% of global mammal biomass, and this is an extraordinary statistic, and 70% of birds alive in the world are poultry, mostly chickens. The risk of continued damage to global the risk of continued damage to global biodiversity is the collapse of ecosystems, including those agricultural systems that produce food, lack of capacity to buffer and reverse climate change, and increased global health risks, including further pandemics. I suggest that everybody reads the report, because it has been produced finally, the three reports, following decades and decades of neglect. So let's look at the National Parks and Wildlife, which was set up in 1991, over 30 years ago. And if any organisation was set up to fail, this one was. And now let me pay tribute to the 400 staff throughout the country in a number of locations, in 32 locations in 19 counties. I want to pay public tribute to them. I don't know how they've continued with years of neglect, underfunding, and none of this is my words. This is the words of Mícheál Ó. I wouldn't think he was a radical, nor did Dr. Stout. Mícheál Ó has been very long part of the establishment and a respected individual, and what he says here is absolutely damning. So we ignore it at our peril. The staff, let me say what they said in relation to funding. This is directly from the report. Chronic underinvestment. The National Parks and Wildlife is inadequately resourced to deliver its remit. It was particularly hit by the 2008 financial crisis. 70% reduction in funding after the financial crash, which persisted unchanged until 2020. Even the turf compensation fund, which was very welcome, had to come out of the National Parks and Wildlife budget without any additional funding. And then over the years, while under-resourcing them and underfunding them, we increased their remit, giving them an absolute job that was impossible. I'm going to just go back again to statistics in relation to the environment globally and then Ireland. As I said, 70% of birds alive are poultry. Can you imagine that? That's what we've come to, mostly chickens. 75% of the land of the earth is very significantly altered. And as I said, 66% of the humans, of the oceans. And then specifically in relation to Ireland, about 75% of Ireland's landscape is intensively managed. 65% agricultural land, 10% forestry. According to Ferdy and Marnell, the National Parks and Wildlife, at the first meeting of the Citizens' Assembly on Biodiversity, just in May, most of Ireland's Biodiversity in the other 25% is in the other and shoved into a corner. 85% of Ireland's protected habitats were in an unfavourable condition, and 43% of protected species were in an unfavourable status. I'm running out of time for all of these statistics, but what really jumps off the page is, notwithstanding that we set it up to fail, then we set it up in complete opposition to the policy of the government in relation to while the National Parks and Wildlife is responsible for delivering on a range of national and international policies and agreements, these are implemented within a national policy context with a strategic focus on increased production and intensification. So one policy completely and utterly at odds with the other. So we're here today, and I hope that finally language means something, and that we are now actually going to do something in relation to different songs were quoted today. I'm going to quote, "It's now or never." We have no further window of opportunity. We know that from today, from the meteorological organisation and from the ongoing reports from the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change. We can no longer stand here and say we didn't know. We can no longer stand here and leave a National Parks and Wildlife to fail. It has taken a biodiversity crisis and a climate change crisis to make us examine the National Parks and Wildlife. And let me say, Minister, I have sat with TDs in my company where the National Parks and Wildlife was denigrated at a time where I thought I was getting a tiny bit of leniency, but maybe I'm not in relation to what you've seen as the other one.
Well, you can.
I'm almost finished in any event. But certainly, it's now or never. It's time to do something. You have my full support in relation to this, but it has to be done, as was said, with the community. And indeed, in Galway, the community have led the way. So we need to have the community on board. We need to recognise that they are the essential ingredient in our role to change what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you.